Okay, guys, and the meetup the webinar cannot hear me, but John, go ahead and introduce the poll if you haven't already.
All right. So I hope everyone can hear me. We're just gonna wait a little bit until everyone gets into the YouTube live room here. We thought it would be a little interesting to see who is coming from where and who's joining us from all sides of the world. So if you take a few minutes here, this is completely anonymous. If you want to just quickly log into polev.com/ASRG, then you can, there's 3 questions, I think, and you can say, okay, which location are you coming from, and it'll show up here on the map so that we can kind of see where everybody's representing today. So go ahead and do that while we're getting things set up. Just also a reminder, we do have a chat channel, so if you do have questions, comments, you want to say hi, whatever you want to say in there, please leave a message or make your comments there. And we will get started in just a few minutes. As people are joining, we do have a small little poll. I don't know if you guys have seen this before, where you go to this polev.com/ASRG, and then this polev.com, you can kind of answer the questions, and it'll show up here on the screen where you guys are calling in from, or where you're located currently. It's completely anonymous, so. So it'll be really interesting to see who's coming from where. There's only one question. Location, no other questions. Hi, Rotem. Dave, I think there's 3 questions, I thought. So if there's only one question, then that's our first issue for today.
Where do I see the questions?
Dan, we need to mute you actually, because you're going directly into the live stream. So the questions, you can find the questions at polev.com/ASRG. So if you're looking at the live stream right now, you'll be able to see that address there. So just for those that are joining right now, we're going to get started in just a few minutes. There it goes. Very cool. You see these green markers where people are joining from all over the world. Very nice. So we're just going to get started here in a few minutes. But as you're coming in, try the poll here. Show us where you're calling in from. So.
Okay, John, and nobody can hear me, but would you like me to fix this poll or try, or just leave it?
I think it's okay. Very cool. So we got some people calling in from the US. It looks like Detroit, Texas, maybe Wisconsin. I can't really see. Brazil calling in. I would assume that's from Recife. Then we got UK representing in the house. We got, okay, this is Norway, I believe. A bunch in Germany, France. Looks like Israel is got a few green marks there. Also Romania, India as well. I would assume that's Delhi. So great, guys. Very cool. So we'll get started in just a few minutes here. 110 people have joined in. Very cool. Awesome. Seattle, Michigan, Chicago, Israel, Italy. That's really great to see such a wide Canada. To see such a wide audience. Really cool. All right, great guys. While everybody's starting to join, we'll get going here in the next few minutes. While you're joining, log into Poll EV quickly and tell us where you're coming in from, where you're calling in from. Romania, Cluj, Pittsburgh, Nuremberg, Recife. Very cool.
In the comments,
Israel.
In the comments here, I see the first joiner from California. So welcome.
Very cool, California. All right. Just 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. All right. California, Detroit. So happy to see everybody joining. 146 people. Great. People from all over the world joining today. That's great. I hope everybody is happy, healthy with this whole Corona thing that's going on. This is our solution for being Corona safe, right?
Okay, shall we get started, John?
Yeah, I think it's about time to get started. So thank you everyone for joining the poll and showing us where you're calling in from today. That's really nice. We're gonna try and do this for all of the ASRG webinars so we can get some interaction with the people that are watching. So,
Cool.
Brandon?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll kick this off. As a little agenda here, guys, we're gonna first go through a little bit about what ASRG is, and then we're gonna hand it over to Upstream. So today, what we're gonna talk about is Allan Konar is gonna present about some recent trends in vehicle cybersecurity, and he's going to take a little bit of a technical deep dive into recent incidents. As a note here, this is our first global webinar. Typically, the ASRG is organized by regional meetups, where we do in-person meetups. But here, what we're trying to do, as John alluded to earlier, is organize, especially with the current pandemic and coronavirus conditions, where we can still bring this kind of content to our membership globally now. And so we're kind of looking at how we can use this as a platform in the future, in addition to what we're doing with our local meetups. Okay, so for a little introduction, John, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's John Heldreth. I've been working in the automotive industry for some time. I'm electrical engineering graduate from Purdue University long time ago, but I've been working in the automotive since 15 years, so Bosch and now Porsche, and I am for the last, almost 5 years now responsible for the product security development at Porsche Engineering.
Okay, and for myself, my name's Brandon Berry. I'm the CEO at a young company in Detroit called Block Harbor Cybersecurity, where we're specifically focused on automotive security, working with some OEM automakers and tier 1 suppliers on issues ranging from penetration testing to security operations center. I got into automotive security kind of right out of college, and really it was out of a passion to do work that keeps people safe. And so I was, merging cybersecurity with what I studied, which was computer engineering, and here I am. As a note, guys, it's not just John and I. Every meetup has their own leadership. So there's a lot of people behind the scenes here who we're not showing now, but we look forward to kind of introducing those other leaders in the ASRG as webinars are hosted in different places globally. So you'll see a little bit more about who's kind of making this happen around the world. Okay, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about what ASRG is? John, you there? You might be muted.
Yeah, that was awesome. I was talking to myself.
Classic.
So ASRG stands for Automotive Security Research Group, and basically what we're trying to do here is support the industry. I mean, we have this IT security industry that's done, it's really good. It's got mature processes, it's got mature technologies and knowledge and all kinds of stuff going on. And then we have this automotive industry, which is we're really good at making cars. We're really good at processes. We're good at long, nice, relaxing development cycles. And now these two areas are kind of coming together, and this is creating a lot of issues, a lot of missing competencies, and we're not quite sure how everything is supposed to fit together. But what ASRG is trying to do is trying to help support the people that are working in this area. So this could be the guys that are actually working on security risk assessments or implementation of security modules, or whatever it might be, even doing the processes that are needed to support a good secure development. So where ASRG is trying to ensure that we have the knowledge in this area, so that people from the IT security industry have the automotive knowledge, and the automotive guys also have the security knowledge, and that at the end of the day, we all have the same goals, right? We're trying to make sure the products, the vehicles, the ECUs, all of this is secure, and ultimately the consumers, me and you and your family and everyone, that we're safe and our data is secure. So since we all have the same goals, it kind of makes sense that we are, helping support from a community standpoint, and we try to do this through knowledge, first of all, so building up of knowledge in this area. This could be either IT or automotive related knowledge. We have lots of resources at ASRG that we allow people to access. The second part is doing networking, because it's great to know where to look up the information, but also knowing who's working in this area, who can I contact, who can I discuss things with, all of these types of issues. It's great to have a good network behind the people that are implementing security. So, and then of course we want to do some collaboration as well. We have a lot of projects that we're working on, do some research, some innovation, all of these topics which might not be so interesting for, the automotive suppliers, the makers. This is something we can probably do in ASRG is projects regarding research and innovation. So
great, yeah. And as I always like to kind of point out, automotive security is a really big problem. No one company or organization can tackle it alone. But what the ASRG is great for is really bringing all parties in the room once a month around the world. So it's a really, really cool organization. Lets you access a global network and so on. And if you're wondering why the faces are blurred out, that's GDPR rearing its ugly head. So, but this is really what the chapters look like. I think this one here is in Stuttgart, Germany. But we have these kind of local gatherings all around the world. And so let's show what that looks like. So ASRG by chapter. Really, pretty distributed here. So we're trying to start up a chapter in San Francisco. By the way, those of you in California, if you're interested in helping start that off, then feel free to reach out to us. Of course, we have Detroit that's been up and going for a little while now. Pittsburgh, which has become a mobility hub here in the US. We have the UK with Oxford. We have plenty of chapters in Germany, Romania, Israel, Egypt, China, Singapore, Sydney, and I don't see Tokyo on here. But yeah, a really global organization, and we'll talk about how you can access kind of that globality of it. Okay.
We started off in 2017 there. It was around 11 people in a small room in Stuttgart. And since then it's kind of had a slow and steady growth, which has been really nice. And then almost 3 years later now, we are in March 2020, and we have over 3,000 members. And that's across all of the different locations in ASRG. So the graph here is showing That's the big black line is our overall numbers, and you see all of the different chapters there in the colored lines as well. Also, you see this gray bars behind it. This is showing our monthly. So on the right axis, this is, you see in February we had actually a growth of almost 500 people just in 1 month, and that's really great to see. Unfortunately, in March was a little bit not so interesting due to some kind of virus that's going around. I don't know, but anyways, with slow, steady growth, this is exactly the way we want to have it. Is we want to make sure that we keep on bringing the value for our members and for you guys. And we look forward to the time when I'm saying, well, slow and steady growth, we're now at 10,000 members.
Yeah.
So
Just a tick over 3,000 now. By the way, what we qualify as members are essentially those attending the local meetups. So if you want to be a member, try and find a meetup chapter around you. Okay.
Or you can even start one too.
Okay, so to talk a little bit about how we fit in with other organizations, we get that question a lot. So we're just going to point to some of our the other groups that we're working with. With the Auto ISAC, we're a partner with them, so we get access to some of their things like their daily threat intelligence and so on. Other areas like reporting vulnerabilities as well. So that's kind of where the OEMs come together, and now us, the open community, have a feed into the Auto ISAC. And then the car hacking village. You may have, if you were at DEF CON, kind of the biggest car hacking village, you probably would have seen some ASRG logos around last year. This upcoming year, you'll probably see a lot more involvement with ASRG, things ranging from kind of introductory material to any other way that we can support. Okay. So I see some comments about lots of introduction, but guys, the reason for this is really to talk about what's available here. So if you do want to get involved, then here's your kind of 3 options: attend a local meetup, start a chapter, or pitch a project. John, you want to introduce the communication platform?
Sure. Yeah. So we have many ways of communicating. We're in a worldwide organization here. So we've set up a Slack channel. We've set up Telegram. This way we can have a better, more real-time conversation across the entire organization. So please join Slack or Telegram. And we also have some social media platforms as well that you can also join.
Okay.
Good. And I think we need everyone's support. This is an organization, it's a community, and one of the biggest things is, not only that we ensure that we bring value to the members themselves, but actually that the members also contribute back, as well as sponsors and organizations as well. ASRG does not work unless we have sponsorship, because this is all done as volunteer work from the administrative side. So I would like to put this out here. Sponsoring ASRG is great for the sponsor as well as great for ASRG. It's global branding opportunities, it's access to exclusive content, posting opportunities, and finding talent. So if you're interested to sponsor ASRG, please reach out to us at hello@asrg.io, and we'll start the discussions there.
Great. Okay, so really, this is the last slide for us. If you wanted to join the newsletter, what we make available there is some AutoISAC information. Just scan this QR code and it'll take you there. So take a screenshot now. Really, what that is a threat intelligence feed that you'll get sent to your inbox throughout the work week, and then updates about the ASRG. So yeah, please join if you want that information. Okay, so couple questions from the audience, John, for you, just quick here. What are the requirements to start your own ASRG chapter?
So actually, anyone can start an ASRG chapter. I would just recommend that you get in contact with us. So hello@asrg.io, and then we can start to discuss what makes sense for that location. And of course, make sure that there's not one already existing. But please just send us an email, hello@asrg.io, and then we can discuss how to make that happen.
Yeah, and really, you need a community around you of people who are willing and to come attend. And more than likely, you'd be surprised where ASRG chapters are starting up.
Okay, I saw also one question concerning whether the slides would be available after. I think we will have them available, and actually the video recording of this presentation will also be available on YouTube. So if you did miss the first 15 minutes, I'm not going to name any names, but you can find this information always on the ASRG YouTube channel.
Okay, with that said, let's get started here. So I will introduce Upstream, and Allan, just make sure you're sharing screen here. Let me just adjust this. Okay. So Allan, I'll let you change this to full screen. Okay, so you guys will apologies, bear with me for a second. There we go. Okay, so Allan, I'll let you introduce yourself, but yeah, we're excited to hear from you, so go ahead.
Great, thank you. So my name is Allan Konar. I'm a solutions architect with Upstream Security. We are a cloud-based security vendor. Our belief is that smart mobility should be safe and secure for everybody. And as John and Brendan already said, there is no silver bullet. There needs to be significant amounts of time and research put into what we do and how we do it. And that's one of the things that we're dedicated to at Upstream. So enough of that. I want to set the tone a little bit for what we'll talk about. The first thing, this is XKCD, wonderful webcomic for nerds if you're into it. But this is sort of a reference to the Untouchables, right? The Chicago way. They bring a knife, you bring a gun. They put one of yours in the hospital, you put one of theirs in the morgue, And so, what should you bring? A knife to a knife fight? Awesome. A knife to a gunfight? Not so great. Knife to a wood fire? Not helping you at all. Knife to an oil fire? You're in trouble. So I'll bring a gun, and I'm great at the knife fight, and I'm great at the gunfight. But shooting that wood fire, shooting that oil fire isn't going to make it better. Water doesn't really help me in the knife and gunfight, but that wood fire certainly helps me. Oil fire makes it much, much worse. And then a lid, right? The best weapon of all. I'm bringing that lid. I'm stopping the oil fire, except clearly in the knife fight, gunfight, and wood fire, I'm not in good shape. So the point is that context is everything. right? We want to ensure that when we're talking about security, we're talking about it in context. There tends to be this hysteria, or there often tends to be this hysteria. Oh my gosh, there's a problem. We need to fix it right away. And what we need to realize is that when we're looking at the security domain, there's fixed resources. There's just so much that we can do to protect our assets, and that's our ultimate goal: protect our assets. In this case, it'll be the vehicle, it'll be the drivers, it'll be the services around the vehicle. That protection can be physical safety. That's something that Brandon mentioned. That's what brought him into this domain. But it can also be obviously protecting the OEM, the company that's making the vehicle and providing the service. Right? You want to ensure that you're not putting your organization at risk. Equally importantly, threats. That's what we're trying to protect against. That's an important thing to take note of. And there's an intersection of the asset, the threat, and the vulnerability, which is that weakness or that gap in your ability to protect what it is that you're looking to protect, your assets. That's what we need to focus on, is risk, right? Risk is that potential for loss. And that potential for loss, again, can be physical. It can be injury or death, but it can also be fiscal. It could be brand recognition gets damaged because of issues with with the vehicle. It could be PII based. Brandon and John mentioned earlier that screenshot from ASRG meetup where they blurred the faces. We're global companies now, and if we lose information, GDPR has pretty severe repercussions related to that. So our focus is going to be on risk as we go through this. Terminology-wise, I also want to say this ahead of time. Hackers are not bad guys, right? You're going to see lots and lots of headlines. Hacker did this, hacker broke that. And there's nothing I can do about those headlines. They're there, and I'll be showing some of them. They're not bad guys. All of us are probably to some greater or lesser extent hackers. We want to understand how things work and how we can tweak them, how we can make them better. So when we're talking about the bad guys, we're going to talk about threat actors or attacker or bad actors. I'll switch it up depending on what I remember at the moment. That said, who are these attackers? Who are these bad guys? Well, nation states, obviously, we see them. We see hacktivists. We see script kiddies who have just discovered, Nmap for the first time, or name your favorite tool. But we're going to focus a lot of our time on the criminal enterprises, and there's a reason for that. Criminal enterprises are just like the phrase indicates. They're enterprises, right? Their entire reason for being is to make a profit, except that they're doing it through theft and through ransomware and through all sorts of other methodologies and mechanisms. And the question that you want to ask is, what are their motivations? Right? What are they looking to do? As opposed to script kiddies who may be trying to disable a service for the sake of showing that they are elite. These threat actors, right? These criminal enterprises are looking to monetize what they do. And that is something really important to keep in mind. So, first thing we'll talk about is controlling cars. I mean, ultimately, that's the nightmare, is that somebody can control the car, steer, stop, accelerate, whatever. Start with a little touch point. Once upon a time, long time ago, you did something physical and it got translated into something physical, right? You cranked a handle and the window rolled down. You depressed a pedal and either hydraulics or fluids or a line did something. You turned the wheel and your pinion engaged the rack, which is what you see in the diagram. That was cool. It was easy. It was low tech. The problems that sort of emerged were that the people buying these vehicles wanted certain features, right? They wanted to be able to open and close the back windows. How do you do that with a handle, with a crank? It doesn't work so well. So we started moving to these electronic systems. But remember, there was a time when you moved your feet and the car moved, right? Today, our cars, our vehicles, There's a running joke when the OEM says the only reason they put tires on their vehicles is so that their computers don't drag on the road when they're being driven. There are 50, 60, 70 or more computers, these ECUs, electronic control units in place. They're connected by these controller area networks developed by Bosch in the 80s. It's this physical layer, and as with Ethernet in the 80s, it was defined as a serial communication or serial bus. Right, so anyone who's played with Ethernet, CSMA, CD, carrier sense multiple access with collision detection. Any given device that is communicating will be heard by all other devices. Only one device can communicate effectively at a time. So we have a half duplex sort of environment. In the CAN world, we've added AMP, which is this arbitrary message priority. So this ability for an endpoint to specify an arbitration ID where the lowest ID wins in terms of what message should be processed. And when we're talking ECUs, we're talking generic units, right? Electronic control units, but the specific forms that you'll see are, ECMs for engine control, BCMs for body control, TCMs for transmission control, so on and so forth. And we'll see that those have been vectors for some time because they're easy, right? When we're looking at the short-range attack vectors. And by the way, I want to take a space here, a beat here, to call out again to the Open Garages folks, Car Hackers Handbook, Craig Smith's book's a few years old now, but you go to opengarages.org/handbook, and you'll see a really great introduction about how to take a look at the range of these attacks and the connected services and how to evaluate them in terms of risk. Anyone who hasn't checked out the Car Hackers Handbook absolutely should. So short-range attack vectors, the really popular one that most of these sorts of meetups talk about, are OBD2 based. We can do message spoofing or ECU spoofing, so we can send rogue commands. We can connect to the CAN bus itself, right? If we didn't want to use this standardized OBD2 interface, we can jump and connect to that CAN bus and control the vehicle, modify configuration, so on and so forth. John had mentioned infotainment, IBI. That is a perfectly valid interface for gaining access to the vehicle. With a gateway, you can control the head unit. You can, possibly get some PII. If there's no gateway or there's an issue with the gateway, then you can get remote vehicle control. We've actually seen examples of that. TCU, V2X, you can obviously read that. So we're going to start with OBD2. Right. I know I promised we'd be looking at the latest in these attacks and what the trends are, but there's a reason we're starting here. The DLC, or the OBD2 connector, is typically used for basic diagnostics, right? You can buy one for $5, $10 off of Amazon, plug it in, connect via an app on your phone, and get information about your vehicle. You can find out if there's a fault, what the fault is, if certain applications can actually steer you to the cheapest garage to get it fixed, or whatever part you need, so on and so forth. That OBD2 that's our OBD2. That's our external physical interface into the vehicle itself. Usually, we'll see it near the steering wheel, so to the left and down, or directly under. Why are we starting here? Well, it's the prima donna attack vector of the automotive world, right? It's what everybody sort of starts with because it's cool. I mean, it's fun. It's a lot of fun to connect into the CAN bus and see what you can do. So what can we do? Frame injections. Remember I mentioned that the CAN bus is a trusted network, the CSMA CD AMP based. It means that it's a broadcast network. All ECUs on the CAN bus see all messages traversing the CAN bus. What that means is that any controller can send a message without validation. So they can send a fake arbitration ID, and remember the lowest arbitration ID always wins, but in this case we can mimic another controller's behavior. We can say, hey, you know what? I am the engine control module, and this is the the RPMs that you're actually seeing, and the instrument cluster will display that. We're no longer in the days where there's a mechanical linkage directly from the tachometer to the wheels themselves. So that's one thing, right? You can have a malicious device, malicious piece of software, whatever, sending messages on the CAN, assuming you have access to the CAN. And it's not just for the dashboard, not just for reading these message types. We can actually, in many cases, inject actions. We can also deny service through the CAN. We can begin by saying, hey, if I have two of these messages that have, that are saying that they're coming from the same device, but we have a lower arbitration ID on one of them, 0 being as low as you get, then if we keep sending messages with that arbitration ID of 0, it always wins the race, and the bus basically remains silent as long as we can keep sending that. That means that none of the ECUs will be able to talk to one another. Pretty brute force, pretty silly, but doable. We could also do a selective cutoff, right? We can continue to send a message every time we see a message that's been sent. We pick it up, we resend it with a different set of data. The device sees it, says there's an error, don't pay attention to it. We cycle through this enough times, and we can force that device to disconnect from the CAN bus. Now that's interesting, but frankly, that takes physical access in this case. So how do we take the CAN bus to Hacktown? Sorry. Anyone who's interested, you can take a look at this link. You'll see one of our security researchers who demonstrates exactly how we've done this. I'm going to walk through the process that we did that sits behind this particular video, and we've recreated this several times and shown how it's been done. In terms of the tools that you'll need to get on the CAN bus, generally Linux is preferred. I tend to use Kali. You can also use Parrot or Ubuntu or whatever you're comfortable with. I just happen to like Kali because it comes with a lot of the tools I use elsewhere. You're going to want SocketCAN. That's the open source set of drivers for the Linux kernel. It lets you create the CAN stack so that you can create a CAN interface on your machines. You can connect, for example, a serial interface or USB interface to the CAN bus through a device that you would be able to purchase. Once again, you can get them right on Amazon for a few dollars. The other tool set that we're using is CAN Utils. That allows us to implement CAN Sniffer. Really, really fascinating. Used a lot. Folks will plug into the OBD2 port, run CAN Sniffer, and drive and mark what's happening when they turn the wheel or depress the brake pedal or the gas pedal or the signals or whatever else. This allows you to capture those CAN messages, and then obviously you can send them using CANSend. There's a number of other applications that are terribly useful. And I'll mention some other tools as we go along. They might not be documented here, or if anyone's interested, just shoot a question in the chat channel, so we make sure to specify the tools. They tend to be all open source. You won't see references to anything otherwise. So, taking the CAN bus, we connect to the OBD2 port. We configure the required settings. So we set the bit rate on CAN 0 to 500 kilobits per second because we want the high-speed CAN. We set the length, the CAN 0 length up, and we begin sniffing. So we're using CAN dump and nothing. All right, we got a problem here. There's something that's blocking our CAN traffic. Not surprising, right? That's what many people on this webinar are working towards. They're working towards mechanisms to ensure that users have access to the CAN interface via the OBD2 that are non-critical, that allow them to do diagnostics as they should, but are protecting critical interfaces, the controls that allow them to stop an engine, as an example. That's great. So we're here. There's clearly a central gateway in place of some kind in the vehicle that we were using. The cool kids, they're on the right side. That's where we want to be. We want to be on that CAN bus 1, CAN bus 2, where we can play with the brakes and engine control and DCM and all the stuff that the criminal actors are interested in. right? They're not interested in attaching to the CAN bus and peeking around. They're interested in monetizing what they do. And think about the types of monetization schemes that you've seen recently, right? By and large, ransomware is the 800-pound gorilla. So what would happen if you could disable an entire fleet of trucks the week before Christmas? An enterprise would be willing to pay a lot of money to get their trucks back on the road. But there are other use cases, and we'll talk about that. But we want to be on that right side. We want to be where the cool kids are, right? So we got to jump the gate. That central gateway is blocking the traffic to and from the OBD2 network. What can we do? Well, we can look for vulnerabilities and exploits, right? We can look for 0 days. We can look for memory vulnerabilities. So we can do like a buffer overflow attack or fuzzing attack that lead to code execution. Challenge there is that they come and go, right? You find a 0 day, hopefully it gets disclosed, hopefully OEM fixes it. There's a lot of luck and a lot of work associated with that. And remember, our goal here, if we're a criminal actor, if we're a bad actor, is to do as little work as possible, with as little risk as possible, with as big a payoff as possible. Right? Those are the 3 things we want. So what else can we do? We can break the OEM security mechanism. That's a lot of work too. Or we look for treasure, right? We look for undocumented or proprietary UDS services. 9 out of 10 times they're there. So how do we jump the gate? Well, more often than not, automotive manufacturers leave these undocumented proprietary services that give access to their ECUs to enable technicians to do health check diagnostics or to do reprogramming. More often than not, when you have a recall these days, the recall will involve reprogramming an ECU, and so they need access to it. Finding that undocumented service can give us what we're trying to achieve. In fact, it can do it with the least work, right? That's their goal. Smallest amount of resources, greatest amount of impact. So what did we do? We connected to the OBD2 port, and we began trying to brute force the bus to help us find all the vehicles, all the ECUs in vehicle, right? So for each arbitration ID, we send a start diagnostic message. If we got a response, either positive or error response, we know there's something that's there that's listening, that's bound, and that's responding to us. Therefore, we should look at it some more. I blurred out the addresses so that the guilty can remain guilty, but not visible. Once we found that list of ECUs in the vehicle, we're able to then do a very similar thing, a similar approach. We send an ECU request to every service ID on each of the ECUs one by one, and if we detect a response, we found a service in the ECU. Again, this happened. We did it, and we found responses. And those responses indicated to us that we could honk the horn, we could start the wipers, lock and unlock the vehicle, activate the brakes. In fact, we were able to, using CanSend, send out messages that did these things to prove it out. And that's nice stuff. That's great. That's a great way to learn how this stuff works. But we want full control of that vehicle, and we want full control of that vehicle remotely. So how do we do that, right? Breaking bad access control. Right? This is where we go all... Oh, no, I won't make that reference. Never mind. So how do we do it? Well, we want to find the security access algorithm and the secrets that are in use. Generally, what you'll find is that crypto is in use. When I say crypto, I mean cryptography, is in use in the automotive domain, as well as many of the other domains that you guys probably play in. And more often than not, either open source mechanisms are used, and more often than not, they're not updated. So in this case, when we went to look, we found that the algorithms and the way the secrets were held hadn't been changed in 5 years. So how do we do it? Right? Again, least amount of work, biggest impact. We can use legitimate tools to reprogram the ECU while sniffing the bus, trying to figure out the algorithm, a lot of work. We can reverse engineer the ECU itself, so extract the firmware, and then work our way through that. Again, that's kind of specialized and a pain. Or we can reverse engineer the tools that are used by legitimate technicians and find algorithms and secrets themselves, most of the time, those applications are Windows binaries, right? They're put out by the vendor, whichever the OEM is. They're used by the dealer technicians to do diagnostics and do reprogramming on the ECUs when necessary. Challenge is that the software is really expensive. It's intended for the technicians. So what do the bad actors do? They get cracked versions, right? They're all out there if you search. There's a certain irony here, which is that hackers, and again, I hate that they use the word hackers, bad actors are targeting other bad actors by infecting their tools with malware. So you'll find that there's cracked versions of the software, and sometimes those cracked versions do bad stuff. So not to belabor this, because I don't want to spend too much time on the CAN bus, let's walk through what this process was. Now, it was a pretty long and winding road, right? We want to examine the config files associated with the application. It's a Windows app, so we can look in the ini files that are associated with it. Challenge is, more often than not, they're encrypted. So we have to figure out how to decrypt them. As I mentioned, the encryption mechanisms in this case were not terribly high tech. Basically, every 2 encoded bytes represented 1 decoded byte. So the decoding algorithm is done on the first and second byte, and a combination of both creates a decoded byte, and frankly, it was fairly easy to work our way through it. What do we get from that? Well, the good news is that we now have the arbitration ID of every single ECU. Once again, we're protecting the guilty here by not showing the actual details of what we decoded, but with that arbitration ID of each of the ECUs and understanding the mechanism used for encryption, we're able to access the control seed key. So when you have the initial exchange, use that control seed key and the algorithm, which we got by reverse engineering the Windows software, right? So you can use IDA Pro or whatever your favorite piece of software is. You find that algorithm, you now have the algorithm and the key, we can now profit. That means that we have the ability to flash the firmware to any ECU in the vehicle, bypassing the CAN gateway, because this software does just that. Awesome. We could potentially flash firmware in place that gives us remote access, or that has a time bomb in place, so based on certain heuristics, takes a certain action. There's all sorts of great stuff we can do, but you know, if I really wanted to crash somebody's car, I'd cut the brake line. That's a lot less work. So what is it that we're seeing? Again, as a touchstone, we're seeing that most of the top manufacturers in the world are saying that all of their new vehicles are going to be connected by the end of 2020. The 3 top-selling manufacturers in the US have said they'll only sell new vehicles that are connected by 2020. So we're talking about close to 1 billion connected vehicles by 2023, and this doesn't take into account retrofitted connected vehicles. So you have, for example, safe drivers insurance that gives you discounts when you're driving if you put a dongle in your car. Or fleets very often will use dongles in their cars for fleet tracking and for routing and for all sorts of other stuff. Blah, blah, blah. What's that mean? Well, it means that all of a sudden there's a new set of these vectors that we have to worry about. Some of them we have to worry about more than others, right? So we suddenly can attack the telematics servers, or the automotive cloud itself, which might have the OTA servers, the application servers, telematics servers, all the servers that allow you to do that remote control of the car. This is sort of the biggest nightmare. Someone gains control of your telematics servers and shuts off every single truck in your fleet, or flashes firmware that bricks your vehicles. Those are the nightmares. These are all hypotheticals I'm talking about, by the way. We'll go into some examples, but I'm talking hypotheticals now. OTA server, obviously a part of automotive cloud, but we want to focus on that specifically. What you'll find is that in the software world, there are mechanisms for signing software that are in popular use. So if you're talking about Windows, typically there's Authenticode signing. It's protected by way of PKI. So that means that when a digital signature is created, it's not just shipped, or digital signature being hashing. As a signature, and you're done. Well, there's as being completely valid, you'd have no way of really knowing. And so in the software world, typically, there'll also be a signing process by which you use a private key that's not exposed to anyone but the signer. And now you can actually do the inverse of the signing function to validate that neither the software nor the checksums have been changed, and we're good. Frankly, the automotive world hasn't really gotten that far with code signing. I will throw one little piece of wisdom out there. It's one of the few that I have, which is that code signing is great, even if, and especially if you're doing PKI based and crypto based, but it's useless unless you're actually checking the signature. And we found significant numbers of cases where that's not true. And to be fair, it's not just in the automotive industry, right? This happened to ASUS a couple of times where updates were sent, they were properly signed, but ASUS laptops didn't check the signatures. They just accepted the updates, which included updates to BIOS. It's the same thing here. That's a worry. What else? Attack from the OT network. This is a future one that we're expecting to see. We've seen kind of weak variations of it, but what happens when someone decides to scan the automotive cloud from their connected car? I mean, the connected car is connected to the automotive cloud as a trusted network source. So what happens if they decide to do that and then try and gain access to the telematics services or whatever else? Attacking the application server and the mobile app itself. Again, we're looking at the case where we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? We're trying to put out mobile apps that unlock the doors and start the car, show you where your vehicle is, honk the horn. And we're having the same set of challenges that the mobile app developers in the enterprise world have had for some time, and that's that we're doing continuous development, continuous integration, and things slip through. I mean, much of what we'll see as we move forward is that the bad actors took advantage of non-secure coding practices or bugs that slipped in or automation that happened that provided information that shouldn't have been in the code. So that's what gets introduced with the connected car. And in fact, there are additional pieces, right? We can overlay the smart city, and now you have the V2X interfaces and smart services, and we can overlay those, so on and so forth. But I'll, just for simplicity's sake, I'll focus on those, and we'll tell a little story. Upstream, as a cloud-based security vendor, realized that as our OEMs were providing us their telematics information, application information, that we were seeing certain repeatable trends and mechanisms and methodologies in use, and we decided that we needed to share that internally, right? As we grew, we found that it becomes tougher for our researchers and our analysts and our hackers to be able to keep up to date on what everyone else is doing. Slack only goes so far. So we started collecting this information internally, and we found that it was useful. It was useful in a bunch of ways. So this is what we call our auto threat. And auto threat is a collection of incidents since we started tracking in 2010, where each incident could represent a singular thing, or it could represent something that's endemic. And that's the thing to remember is 460 incidents in a decade, big deal. Well, it is a big deal. In the enterprise, yeah, we get this this many incidents in a week or even a day in some cases. In the vehicular world, in the automotive world, each of these incidents can affect one person. It can affect a fleet of thousands of cars. It can affect entire make, model, trim, year of millions of cars. So these incidents are significantly more dangerous and more interesting at the same time. So walking through this, what have we seen? Well, we've seen there's been a significant growth in these incidents, right? There's been a 7.5 time growth from 2016 till 2019, 2.5 time growth between 2018 and 2019 alone. And that's because, number one, the introduction of connected vehicles and services. Number two, bad actors recognizing that they can monetize access to these services and their bad actions. And number three, tools and understanding, right? What else is interesting? Well, as of 2019, the black hat is what we call it there, but I'll say bad actor based incidents outnumbered the good actor incidents. So the researchers, the journalists, the students, that happened for the first time in 2019. That's amazing. I mean, think about it. You now have people trying to monetize this attacking that's not just a key fob relay attack. What we'll protect against by throwing our key fob in a coffee can. These are folks that are getting pretty sophisticated in how they're doing it. What are we seeing? Well, if you take a look, you see that keyless entry, key fobs, that's still that's still the largest vector. It's not the majority, it's a plurality, right? 28% of the attacks that we've tracked have been key fob based. But the vast majority of those, 97, 98% of those attacks are focused on stealing a car or breaking into a car to steal something from within the car, or both. That's terrible, right? Someone steals my car, it is a tragedy. But as an OEM, as a security enthusiast, my bigger worry is, against the security and safety for the greater public, for the greater good. So what are we worried about here? Well, look at the mobile apps. We mentioned mobile apps. We're in a situation now where you have the case that the automotive world is in the same position that enterprise was from the late 90s up till today, where you have BYOD, people bringing their own phones, their own tablets, putting applications on it, and you have no control. There is no MDM in the automotive world, so you have no control over those devices. So the devices can be infected with malware, with fake versions of applications, with API-driven access to services. There's at least 3 vendors that have opened their APIs for third-party apps. What have we seen? Well, privacy breaches. Our old friend PII, right? These privacy breaches cost a lot. There are the lawsuits. There are the government fines, especially if we're looking at GDPR. There's loss of OEM credibility. That's bad news, right? Car control systems. A lot of this happens to be researchers. The majority of it happens to be researchers, but researchers can find this stuff, so can the bad actors. Service and business disruption. We've seen, for example, car share companies that have been affected by this, that have had to suspend service until these issues have been resolved. Location tracking, fraud. This is actually also where we have an intersection with safety. Another thing that you'll see very often is that a couple will break up, one will keep the vehicle, the other retains access to the vehicle through the mobile app, and is a little bit angry and starts the engine at 3 in the morning so that the gas runs out, or sets the alarm off at 2 in the morning, or tracks where their significant other is and harasses them. That's where it begins to abut safety, and it gets really, really scary. And it's not just true there. We're also seeing in the secondhand market, as folks are trading in vehicles, they're forgetting to remove their details from their Bluetooth connected phones, or to disconnect their accounts from the mobile applications. We see it in the rental world too. So the mobile apps are certainly something that we have to worry about, that we have very little control over. And ultimately, the servers, right? This is something that we are very worried about, because again, PII, right? That can cost us a lot of money. Car control, that's something that we're not seeing a lot of outside of researchers, right? So the Wired magazine GPAC, that was great. That was cool. It took a lot of work to do. The takeaway from there, though, was that they practiced over and over and over again for weeks before they did it. And the fact that they were practicing was never captured. So visibility is key. That's the reason we present these threat trends, is that without visibility, you can have the best defense possible in your vehicle. can have the best gateways and firewalls and whatever else, but the threat actors, they're going to continue to vary their attacks until they find the combination in the vector they're using that works. So knowing that these attacks are happening is as important as protecting against them. For anyone who's interested, we put out a Global Automotive Cybersecurity Report every year. It's free. You can go to the URL down there. We'll post the URL afterwards, and you'll have access to it. And it's sort of everything that we've talked about here collapsed into a singular report. It's been referenced multiple times, so on and so forth. All right, so finally, we're going to take a look at what we mentioned early on, which is concrete examples. We'll dive down as deeply as we can into each of them. In some cases, we don't necessarily have the ability to do this because of privacy and security reasons, but we'll do the best we can. And understand these are just public examples. We're sticking to public examples. We're trying to stick to researchers and non-bad actor examples that can be extrapolated on for a number of legal reasons. So, attacking the automotive cloud. Frankly, this one's my favorite. Automotive cloud, where you have the telematics servers and OTA servers and application servers. They're using the same set of applications that have been used in the enterprise world, right? They're using Apache and Nginx and MySQL and MongoDB and Oracle DB and Bootstrap and Node.js, right? All of those have well-known vulnerabilities, and frankly, those infrastructures are not updated enough because you're sort of tied into the application a lot of times. I do pen testing and red teaming, and probably the top result I get more often than not is that someone's using a very, very old version of Node.js that has known vulnerabilities that makes it easy for me to attack. I don't even have to work at it. I can just go and look at CVE and take sample code, and I'm good. So attacking those allow us to send a set of messages from the telematics server such that it looks valid to our vehicles. And that means that we could send door unlock commands. We can send stop engine or kill engine commands. And that's catastrophic. This is one of those cases where we're worried about ransomware, someone attacking the telematics server and locking the OEM out or the fleet out of the ability to control their connected cars. Equally importantly, not doing a ransomware attack, doing a targeted attack and originating those messages from the telematics server to the connected cars where it looks valid, right? From a connected car perspective, it's coming from the right telematics server. But it didn't come from an application server, which didn't receive the request from an application. So how can we tell there's a problem? Well, we can't. On the connected car, we really can't. It's non-trivial. So this is, again, one of those points I wanted to make, that we need visibility in order to see what's happening. We need visibility end-to-end because we do have a complex chain. So a simple example, 2018, Sykes and Lovdanis. Sorry, my memory is not so good. Sykes and Lovdanis, they found misconfigured server by CalAmp, which gave them direct access to most of their production databases. Simple misconfiguration. Well, that doesn't count, Alan. That's not fair. It's misconfiguration. I mean, that happens. Yeah, that's the point. It happens. We see that databases get put outside of their protected domain. We see that source and destination controls aren't put in place. These are all the things that, again, we're seeing in the enterprise and we've seen for the past decade. So what did it do? Well, it gave them access to the backend systems of the internet-connected vehicle management systems that were provided by Viper, which then meant that they can locate vehicles, they could reset passwords, unlock doors, disable alarms, start engines, kill engines if they were, configured to do so by the dealer. This was a simple misconfiguration. I just want to make that point. The misconfigurations and issues in code, they come up. We have a more recent example. This happened to Mercedes-Benz just last year, end of year. You know, for those that are saying May 2018, that's forever ago. Well, just end of last year, Mercedes-Benz had a similar issue where there weren't correct filters, and you could bring up the app and see other people's data. In fact, that's what you typically saw. And if you, for example, put into place a proxy on your phone, there are tons of free proxies you can put on your phone. You can capture traffic back and forth between your application and the back end. It's something I did the day after we purchased a new car for my wife. She was not happy about it. And I logged into the app and took out the bearer token. Remember, this is HTTP in most cases. So I took the bearer token and then connected to that back end, pretending to be the application itself, right? Using Chrome, I was able to change my oh gosh, English no good today. I was able to change my agent ID so it looked like it was coming from my phone, use that bearer ID by using a plugin to put the token in place. And this was all manual, really easy. It took me less than 2 minutes. And it allowed you to go through multiple different users' information. I just went and kept changing the ID that I was looking for information. The JSON that got sent back to me was for different users, right? I extrapolate from there, I could just easily control those users. And there's a great article that we'll reference and post in here. It was written by a researcher who did something similar, but instead of putting the proxy on their phone, she put it on her laptop and attached the phone to the laptop, but the same process works effectively. Very easy to do, not necessarily easy to detect. Malicious OTA, 0-day. Well, I mean, this one talks for itself. Effectively, we have this ability, potentially, if we take over the OTA server, to put firmware in place that allows us reverse access, to create a reverse shell. So if we get that OTA server and we push the OTA software out, or if we gain access to the network between OTA server and the connected cars, the automotive cloud, we have this ability to fake the software, the firmware that gets put in place. And again, that gives us access to a single vehicle. You saw that in the example we walked through when we connected to the CAN and we were able to push bad firmware in place. We have another example that I didn't give for the last one for the telematics server, but it holds true here, which is that because many of these are using software that is well known, you can use Nmap as an example to find open ports. You find an open port and connect to the port and find certain simple issues. For example, one of the servers we found had a serialization issue connected to a port. The serialization, serializer crashed and left you as root. That was awesome. That meant that we were able to write some scripts and wrap some cron tasks around them, because we obviously don't want them to be found. Clean up our tracks and the logs, so on and so forth. And that's a really simple one. I'm being asked right now, are there other factors for this particular OTA one? And I would say that factor-wise, obviously, I talked about code signing. That's really important. Visibility is probably the most important, so understanding that when something gets pushed by the OTA, it's intended. But another factor, which is that not all of these are malicious. Let's say that we have a new piece of firmware and there's a bug in it. Right? It happens, right? That firmware gets pushed down and your connected cars are driving and it affects their braking ability, or it reports back bad information to the telematics server on GPS or whatever it might be. Well, you really wouldn't know that until someone complained. That's not the VSOC you want. You don't want your SIM to be a customer calling in and complaining, because you've already lost at that point. So you need that visibility within the connected car fleet once it's received that firmware update to know, okay, maybe there's something wrong here. And even more importantly, can I take automated action? Right? When you have these sorts of deterministic events, one of the things that we want to try and do is make it easier for individuals like us to manage them, right? If you have tens of millions of vehicles to manage, you don't want to have hundreds or thousands of people looking after them. What if we could say, you know, if there's a firmware update, so keeping the context, we had a firmware update, and within 10 minutes we started seeing bad data or braking characteristics changed. If we could see that and take action on it through a SOAR, right, that would make our lives significantly easier. We sort of saw an example, an example of this when we went through the CAN bus. Number 3, attacking the telematics server. So I've gone through that over and over and over again, but in this case, instead of attacking it from the interwebs, we're now attacking it from the connected vehicle. This one's kind of funny because there have been some previous attacks that haven't been hugely significant, but they're interesting. One of the earliest ones was a user realized that there was a physical SIM card in their vehicle, and they removed it and put it in their phone, and they got unlimited data over the dedicated APN for the connected car network. Could have been more dangerous, right? I mean, once you have dedicated access to the APN, so the over-the-air network for the connected cars, right? You want this to be a separate APN because it's going to be continual lots of traffic. It's not just going to be about data theft. It's not just going to be about OEM having to pay for the 50,000 hours of data, unlimited data that this person used. And this isn't one that we've seen today. It's not one that I think we would expect to happen, today, tomorrow. But it is one that, because cars are becoming more intelligent and people are depending on them, are connecting via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi to the vehicles, that they're going to realize, hey, these vehicles are in a trusted network. So maybe I can scan that trusted network, the automotive cloud, to see what's available. Maybe get a foothold in the automotive cloud and pivot. So maybe it's something as simple as getting access to a router which has a known vulnerability and initiating a pivot. This is now starting to sound a lot less like a vehicle, but we're talking about computers on wheels, and so we do have to consider that. We do have a quick question, which is, would an increase in secure code quality significantly reduce the threats of connected vehicles, or does it depend on multiple factors? If so, what other factors can you name? Now, I'm picking that one up because these last couple of vectors we've been talking about touch those significantly. And the answer is yeah, absolutely. Improvement in code quality everywhere reduces those available vectors. We've actually been speaking to OEMs who have started to do static and dynamic code scanning. They've started to implement processes internally related to code. So, for example, a developer isn't allowed to push their code to their internal repo unless they meet the organization's internal security metrics, which include policies, which include a scan every week and pushing down the policies, whatever it is. So process and improvement in code quality, certainly. Training on secure coding practices, that's incredibly important. Those two alone can mitigate a massive amount of what researchers have found. But there are other factors, and those factors are the same ones that we see in the enterprise and the commercial world, which is that very often we're using libraries from others, right? So we can maybe guarantee the quality of our code, but what about the code that we used for TLS, right? OpenSSL has been in use over and over and over again across the world for a long time, and recently there were a number of issues, long-standing issues, that have been exposed on. So, there are numerous libraries at play. There are certain practices that go to code quality, but not in terms of what you're writing, but in terms of the tools you're using. What if what's posted for the open source to GitHub is not what you get when you do a yum or an apt-based install of that library or that piece of code. It's not necessarily the same, so there could be issues embedded there. All right, so continuing, attacking the telematics server from the OT side, we do expect that to become a vector moving forward. Attacking the application server from the mobile app. I gave you a great example, actually 2 or 3 examples, where I was able to put a proxy in place and intercept the traffic from my mobile app. Obviously, it involved a little bit of work. I had to generate a certificate for the proxy, install it as a root cert in the mobile app so that it wasn't flagged as being invalid. Interestingly enough, the vendors have not implemented HSTS or cert pinning, so I was able to do that. For those that are interested, we can specify some links to information about that. Remember that much of the technology in use is widespread, so we're still talking HTTP, JSON, JavaScript, whatever. That one was a simple one. So what happens? Well, we can find the vulnerabilities in the mobile web app. And once we have those, we effectively can get to the telematics server and we can take control of someone else's car. So we can say, all right, app server, unlock this car. App server, start this engine. App server, kill this engine. Well, again, visibility is key here. All we're seeing is that a connected car's doors opened. Great. Let's look at the telematics server. Telematics server says, yeah, I got a request from the app server to unlock it. It's valid. I look at the app server. Yeah, I sent that out, completely valid. And I received it from someone who, has a correct bearer token. So we need this end-to-end view, right? Visibility is key to understand what otherwise looks like a valid transaction, whether or not that actually is a valid transaction. Again, this is an example from the research world. I hate that it says hacker. But there was I guess I'll call him a hacker. There was a gentleman who goes by the tag L&M, and he was able to connect to iTrack and ProTrack accounts, somewhere in the realm of 20,000-30,000 of them, and effectively, the GPS devices had this mobile app associated with them. He was able to connect, and he was able to take a look at data for any of the vehicles that were connected. The software also gives the capability to turn off engines for vehicles that are traveling under a certain speed, like 10 or 12 miles per hour, assuming that feature is enabled. So, how they do it, they reverse engineered the ProTrack and iTrack software. This is what L&M said. And what they found, and this is going back to what I said earlier, it doesn't necessarily need genius to figure this stuff out, that customers were given the default password of 123456 when they sign up. Yes, that's the password they were given. Poor practice. Would secure coding help fix that? No, it wouldn't have. Would good process fix that? Yeah. So he was able to brute force these accounts and then collect data and control and reset passwords for these applications. And again, they're web-based apps, right? You're not writing something that's purely Android-based or purely iOS-based. These things depend on backend servers and generally the way the world is JSON. Related to that, what's our view on the importance of side channel attacks? Or to ask differently, is it worth the effort to spend on hardening of MCUs? So, frankly, it's incredibly important to protect from in-vehicle upload. We will never take away from that. It's important to look at a range of solutions. There's some really brilliant ones. Red Balloon, as an example, they do this interesting code interleaving that can detect variations in behaviors. There are firewalls and there are gateways and hardening mechanisms that can happen. We should never give up on those. Obviously, we want to have a multi-layered defense. The best defenses that we see in the world today are based on zero trust. They're based on moving away from the hard candy shell and gooey, creamy inside firewall model that's been used for a couple of decades. They've now moved to the zero trust model where the components are understood to exist anywhere and to be able to access stuff from anywhere. Well, if we can marry that model to the in-vehicle world, that's the best of both worlds. So protecting the in-vehicle via good gateways and hardening and good coding, secure coding practices. But as I've said throughout this entire thing, it's equally important to ensure that we look for we try and ensure that we have visibility world to world. So anything that's done in vehicle should also be instrumented such that your servers have access to logs and activities that occurred in vehicles, so that you can look for the heuristics that help you detect an attack, or even better, predict an attack. All right, what's next? Attacking the private API mobile, so attacking the operator network, so trying to connect to the infotainment or TCU to find vulnerabilities, access the CAN bus, ECUs, and more. Again, perfectly valid, but more work than all the rest that we've looked at to date. That said, Tencent Labs, love these guys. They have the Keen Security Lab, and they have focused on the Tesla for a long time. In fact, if you take a look, we're including these links to the specific incident that's referenced here, where they were able to over the internet connect to infotainment system, jump the gateway. To be clear, that involved some work connecting to the infotainment system originally and gaining root access and making some changes. You'll also see the details of how they remotely compromised it. They presented it at Black Hat. Interestingly enough, they presented this in, they did the work in 2016, they presented it in 2018, they presented it in 2016 to Tesla. Tesla put a bunch of fixes in place. They redid a series of the same attacks or similar attacks in 2018, which is what they presented at Black Hat, and they were still able to access the Tesla remotely, jumping the gateway. Why is that? Well, there's a significant cost and time factor associated with putting these fixes in place, not the least of which is the coding, but also the QA, right? You have to test this stuff. Now, Tesla's done a phenomenal job. I mean, they've turned the market on its head, right? They have introduced this idea that we want to do firmware updates over the air because we can fix problems in our code, and our code directly controls our vehicles. If you want to harden those components, right, that takes systematic changes. That takes years. It means, as I mentioned, coding practices, static and dynamic code analysis, all of that, and then pushing all that software to your vehicles. And we know it's a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year cycle in some cases to do that. So it takes a long time. You have to figure that into the solutions that you choose. Talking again about the side channel attack question, you have to figure that out, figure that into how you want to approach this, what your strategy is, and understand that visibility is key. I'll say that now, I'll say it again, I'll say it over and over again. In fact, takeaways, if nothing else, the folks that we have to worry about, they're looking to monetize our activities. The folks who aren't looking to monetize, the researchers, are giving us this information and helping us understand how to do things better. That's what the Open Garages folks do. That's what ASRG does. That's what Auto ISAC does. It brings people together, or they bring people together to share what we found, and as a community to make it better. And they've done a phenomenal job at it. It's the bad actors we have to worry about. They don't want to share what they found. They want to monetize their activities, and they want to do it with as little work, as much payoff, and as little risk as possible. These remote attacks, they're attractive, and they're only going to get more attractive. Again, less risk, wider set of targets, they're more profitable. Right? The idea of attacking a singular vehicle via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or OBD2 versus attacking a server with well-known components and being able to control every single car of a certain make, model, trim, year. Layered solutions are key. You have to have in-vehicle solutions in place. You have to have them. They need to be instrumented such that we have to be instrumented such that we can track what's happening in vehicle. But you'll see that this term VSOC has popped up in the last couple of years. This idea that you have a vehicle security operations center similar to the IT SOC, but with OT specific knowledge overlaid on the IT solutions. That would be a combination of in-vehicle gateways and reporting and cloud-based solutions that allow you to collect and aggregate that information, because it's not just the vehicle info we want to see, right? It's the server info, it's the application info, so on and so forth. Quick question popped up because I keep saying, that bad actors are looking to monetize activities, and the question is, how exactly are they monetizing it? There's a range from the fairly simple low end. There was a group of thieves that purchased a key reprogrammer from Amazon. It was 200 something bucks. With shipping, it cost them 400 because where they were. They started stealing vehicles and working with a garage. The garage would take in a totaled vehicle, ask these thieves to steal a vehicle of the same make, model, year, trim, and then switch VINs and resell the vehicle as new. Low tech. I mean, other than they're using a reprogrammer in order to access the car and start it, move, and to disable the GPS so that it wasn't trackable, so on and so forth. Interestingly, the way that they were found wasn't because of, an OEM or a fleet or whoever else, tracking them and figuring it out, or even the police. Somebody in the group got angry at somebody else in the group and turned them in, and they were all arrested. This is, again, one of those cases where visibility would have been key here. So that's the simple side. We're starting to see that in the fleet world, there's a number of ransomware attacks in order to stop the fleets from being able to operate. I mean, that is that's one of their nightmares, not being able to use their vehicles, and so they have to either recover from backups if they've done them. Many of these fleets have not done regular backups, or pay off the ransom and hope that they get access to their systems again, or start from scratch. And I've seen in the past couple of months, at least 4 or 5 incidents that have come across my board where that's happened. We're going to see other cases for monetization moving forward, right? I mean, every technology that we've used, bad actors have tried to figure out how do we take advantage of it in order to make money, whether it's spear phishing in order to gain credentials to the backend server. We saw that just last week. Any range of them. And visibility is key. I mean, I keep saying it, but you need to be able to have your in-vehicle solutions, but you also need to be able to track not just the vehicles themselves, but all the software and services associated with them. So static and dynamic code scanning, cloud-based VSOC that is able to integrate data from your application server, from your telematics server, from the vehicle gateway, from services that you're introducing. Right? If you think about what the big OEMs are looking at today, their target is introducing, keyless access to vehicles on their high-end vehicles. They're looking at firmware over-the-air updates, right? They're looking at potentially displacing other services, right? As you're driving around, you want to figure out where to eat. You bring up whatever your favorite app happens to be to find a nearby restaurant. Well, what if you can get that through your IVI system directly, and you didn't have to bring up a piece of software on your phone to do it? The more that we're looking to monetize the services on top of these wheeled computers, the more vectors we're opening up, and the more we have to consider that the bad actors, the bad guys, are going to try and monetize it. I will say that I am done presenting right now. Gents, do we have a series of questions, John, Brandon, that we want to talk about?
So I think that Dan has passed a number of those on to you here. Yeah. So we just had one more question come in that was, how many lines of malicious code to brick a vehicle? Allan, do you want to respond to that?
That's a great question. How many lines? This is like that game show, right? How many notes of music do you need in order to identify the song? Well, Bob, I can do it in one line or less. Frankly, if you push a bad a piece of OTA firmware, 0 lines of code. You just corrupt the OTA firmware, corrupt the boot process. You have bricked the vehicle. Literally 0 lines of code.
Yeah.
We've seen this happen.
And Allan, I think there's a very recent incident with Tesla Model 3s, if I'm not mistaken, where if you load a very short piece of JavaScript on the Model 3 head unit, then it would effectively denial of service the car.
Yep.
So that was what, 5 lines or so of JavaScript embedded in a malicious web page?
Yep. That's it's pretty interesting. I mean, we tend to think in binary terms in certain details, right? We're in the middle of the forest, right? And we have to remember that we're looking for solutions. We're not necessarily looking to make the solution we're working on work. We're looking for solutions for the problem. We have to keep focusing on the problem. That was a great one, though. That was a really great one. I mean, yeah, you see that with Tesla, they're a great example. They have a browser running, and so someone can slip a nanovisor in place. A nanovisor being just a fancy way of saying a piece of JavaScript that sits in the DOM that that interprets the data before any other part of the DOM is done. So it would be in the head. And one of the interesting things about that, and I know this is sort of tangential, is that when you have JavaScript in a given application, that JavaScript suddenly has access to anything in the DOM, right? It can break out and access data anywhere. So those cases where you're using CDN provided components, or you're using third-party components, those can break out of the DOM, and those can access data that they shouldn't.
Okay. Another question that we maybe looked over: are there currently vehicles in production that don't isolate your CAN at the DLC or the OBD port from your powertrain or chassis CAN buses?
That's a good question. I have not. I'm working with obviously newer vehicles, so I've not run into any. I couldn't give you a good answer on that. I mean, I imagine that there are. I imagine that there are significant numbers of them. I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. It's outside of my comfort zone. I don't want to be a liar here.
Well, and I'll just point out that sometimes secure gateways are a function of vehicle cost. So if it's a lower or more economy vehicle, gateways aren't placed in the vehicle. But certainly up to probably 2016 or so, gateways were not so common across all vehicles, at least.
You know what? I'm being nudged by my daughter. She's saying, "Hey, Daddy, what about fleets?" Yeah, fleets. I mentioned this actually in the beginning of the presentation. Fleets are using aftermarket connectivity, and many of them are. Some of them are OBD2 based, but many of them are actually in vehicle because that gives them access, for example, to the lane assist cameras, right? So if a truck is in a crash, the last seconds before the crash from the lane assist cameras can be stored. So it's by design that those aftermarket components actually are not isolated. So thank you to my daughter for reminding me of that. I'm incredibly worried that at 6 years old she knows this. Let's see, another question. What in-vehicle data is analyzed in VSOCs today? Are the OEMs able to transmit detailed infos of the CAN or other bus systems and ECUs to back-end monitoring systems? Wow, that's a really good question. So what in-vehicle data is analyzed by VSOCs? So VSOCs are still nascent, right? We're seeing a lot of cases where MSSPs are helping OEMs to begin their VSOC operations. We're seeing cases where IT SOCs are helping to bring them up. We're seeing that by and large, OEMs have decades of data that very often is used for root cause analysis, for RCA, for other stuff, but it's not actively used for security. Security, remember, tends to be looked at as a cost, as something that has to be done. Hence, we need to focus on risk, right? The risk versus reward or the downside. So what's being analyzed? Well, in our case, we're seeing a combination of in-vehicle gateways that are sending us information. Interestingly enough, because we're an out-of-band cloud-based solution, we actually get the data from not directly from the vehicle, but from a logging source in the automotive cloud. So, for example, a vehicle might be taking advantage of MCVP, right? Microsoft's IoT services for vehicles. So they might be using Google, so they might be using Amazon's, AWS's. Many of them have set up environments where you can subscribe to data streams. So a pub sub model for those who've used Kafka before. An example, since I mentioned Microsoft, they use Event Hub, right? So you have the ability to subscribe to Event Hub and get information from the vehicles without being in line. So this means no changes to the vehicles. They're already sending this information back to the telematics server. It's already being stored in their AWS cloud or Microsoft cloud or Google cloud. And we're able to extract that data and see information from the CAN itself or from the gateway itself. Equally importantly, we're seeing that the telematics servers obviously have logging functions, and more often than not, those are able to be dumped into XML or CSV or JSON files, which can be ingested. But most of the time, what we're most typically seeing is that the data that we're accessing, the data that we're working with, tends to be from the automotive cloud. OEMs are working to expand the amount and the type of data that gets shared back to their clouds. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So with that said, I think that's the extent of the questions, and I want to give everybody some time here. So thank you everyone for joining. Allan, thank you so much for presenting. Really enjoyed your presentation. If you guys need anything from the ASRG or want to reach out, again, reach out to hello@asrg.io. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so we're all volunteers here, working together to make this happen around the world. And also appreciate you guys bearing with the technical challenges here. Stay tuned for more webinars. We'll see what other kind of content and presenters we can get here. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and Allan, one more time, thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thank you guys for attending. The more that we share, the better the community is. I would suggest highly that if you haven't yet, reach out to the ASRG, become involved, join the Slack channel, because there's a lot of good conversations that are going on, everything from the details of the bus all the way up through the sorts of services that we talked about here. So thanks again.
Yes. So please go back and join the Slack channels if you get a chance. So, all right, thank you everyone. See you later.
Take care.
Great, guys. Have a good night or good morning.